Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So glad that you can join us for today. Today is a book launch of Drama Box's book, uh, and we have also a panel discussion. And I would like to afterwards hope that we can have a lot of participation from people on our discussion. My name is Heng. I'm the artist and founder of Drama Box. It's a great pleasure for us today to run this session. This is also to commemorate the launch of this very important book. This is the first book. I would say that this original book in Mandarin was first published in Mandarin in Chinese and written by Yin Hao. It is an important book for Drama Box because it documented the earlier 20 years of our work. And we have always been thinking of whether we can or not publish the book in English because we have been going overseas and we've been meeting various friends. They have always been telling us that they would like to read about this book. And so Drama Box then decided that we should translate this book. And that's why we started this long journey of getting this book done. And this has been a process that we have been trying to do. And and what happens here is that it took us a number of years having three different people coming on board to help us with the translation. Shirley Bryant, Li Qiming, as well as Liu Kai Kuen to help us to edit the book. And at the end, we also had Hong Xin Yu who helped us to do further editing before this book is ready to meet our audience. Today, we have the writer of the book, Howie, uh, sharing with us probably his thoughts about this publication of this translation. Let us invite Howie to respond. Howie? Howie, are you there?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. So, a very good day to everyone. Greetings from London. Thank you very much to Heng Luan for hosting this event, and my heartfelt gratitude to the entire team at Drummer Box for making this possible. I'm actually quite relieved, grateful, and glad that we can finally put the project to bed after many years of hard work, delays, and disruptions. So this book is especially dedicated to Heng Luan, Siren, Alvin Tan, and Harish Sharma, whom have inspired me to think about theater in many different ways. They have made theater, they have made the practice and research of theater exciting and inspiring. Even though this book is a dedication to people who are making exciting theater, who are making theater that you know pursue the goal of cultural intervention. As an academic, I would like to be as critical as possible. So when you read this book, you notice that where appropriate and possible, I always go for the kill, in the sense that I try to be critical. I try to raise questions. I'm also very privileged to have two practitioners. One is an educator, the other is an actor. So I'm very glad that Bernice and Yan Ying are able to join us today. I look forward to hearing them talk about the book, but more importantly, I would like to learn from their insights and experiences. So later on when I speak, I am conscious I speak from a Singapore, London, and Sinophone-centric background and experience. So nevertheless, I hope what I share will offer thoughtful discussion or even criticisms. Now, this book was based on my master's, which I did under the supervision of Professor Kwa Siren at Nanyang Technological University. And it was my research on drama box, book length research. It was hell for me, to be honest, during those days, because having to do a full-time job teaching in a high school and then doing part-time masters over a long period of time. It was challenging, but it was also an endeavor that led me to a career in academia, which I'm very thankful for. I'm very privileged to be in this field, even though it is constantly under threat. I'll talk about that later when we talk about theatre and crisis. So I think the audience will be very interested to hear what Bernice and Yan Ying have to say as well. So I'll leave it as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Howie. Of course, to get this book published, we have to also thank page setters, Kadu, who have been helping us to publish this book together with Drama Box. I would like also take this opportunity to thank Yong Yi from Semi Studio for publishing this, for designing this beautiful book. And so, if you are interested in getting this book, please go onto our website. It is available online, so that it's easy for you to access. We do have some number of physical copies. I will share more about the physical copies later, how you can get these books. I just thought that maybe, since how we have just talked about the book, with Yan Ying or Bernice, who are two our guests today, to if they have any thoughts on this. Yan Ying and Bernice. Hi, let me introduce Yan Ying and Bernice before okay. Yan Ying is a Singapore young director. I wouldn't say young, is early career director. Not that she's not young, but I think Yan Ying is special in Singapore because I think we all know that Singapore theatre scene has been going through a change. I think now, last time when we used to have a lot of theatre companies set up by young practitioners, now what we see actually are more and more young artists who make out on their own as freelance practitioners. They will work with different companies, they work with the art centers, and they create their own work. And they are also a lot of time part of collectives, and they will also then work with various companies. So they are quite fluid in where they make their work. But at the same time, in that fluidity, a lot of all these early career artists, you can see them striking a kind of specific, or I would say that they would find their own style and their particular aesthetic kind of way of approaching theatre. And I think that's not easy. So Yan Ying belongs to that generation. Yan Ying has not only worked in Singapore, but she has also worked in America. Yan Ying, do you have any response to the book that you just read? Mm-hmm.
Hello, thank you so much, Leun, Drama Box, Howie, Bernice for having me here today, and big congratulations on the launch of the English translation of the book as well. So I've been really digging into it over the last 2 weeks, listening to it via PDF to speech audio on my way to rehearsals and such. And I thought it was a really insightful glimpse into Drama Box's history from 1990 to 2006, when I was still a kid / like not born yet. So I appreciated, the learning about the ways that Drama Box strive to retain its artistic autonomy as well as artistic integrity in the face of state censorship and regulations, and the very vivid and detailed case studies about some of the productions that Drama Box has done really helped to elucidate these points as well. And I thought how we, very carefully, thoughtfully, and selected these productions to speak about and gave very incisive critical analysis as well, not just talk it up, but also spoke about ways in which it had its limitations and how Drama Box tried to work through that. And I thought that process, understanding that process, was very valuable and interesting for me. For example, in the ways that it wrestled with power intermediaries, or the ways that it advocated for the rights and freedom of gender and sexual minorities as well. It made me think a lot about how the artist and state relationship has evolved over the years since 2006. So over the last 20 years, there have been shifts as well. Certain parts where, things feel like they have remained stagnant, but also parts where, that areas that I, as an early career practitioner, now don't have to wrestle with quite so much anymore. So to also remind myself not to take that element of freedom for granted, but also with the knowledge that there are still a lot of limitations and, OB markers that I am working within, as well as my peers in the industry today. And I would encourage people to pick up the book, read it, because including if you are coming from, a background similar to mine when you're relatively early in your career, because I think there's an importance to having an understanding about how we came to be as well, and theater before we entered the industry, and how we got to where we are. So thank you very much for that incisive book.
Thank you, YY, for the shout out. So do get the book. and of course, we have a good friend here, Bernice Chan, my good friend from Hong Kong. Bernice Chan is General Manager of the International Association of Theatre Critics, Hong Kong, and an examiner of the Hong Kong Arts Development Council for Drama Community. I would sometimes jokingly say that she's like the encyclopedia of Hong Kong theatre. I can see she frowned. I think IATC does a lot of important work in Hong Kong, from doing inviting critics to write works about what happens in Hong Kong or the performances. But at the same time, for many years in the past, they have actually did a lot of archival, and all these are important resources for people to understand how Hong Kong theatre develops. And she has also organized various kind of conferences. And as someone who is been in the field for that long, she has deep knowledge on how productions are made. She has deep knowledge on the companies there, as well as how the Hong Kong theatre has developed over the years. So thank you, Bernice, for coming. I wonder if you have anything to say in response to how we said about the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon, and congratulations for the translation of the book. And it's really very important, especially I heard about Yan Ying's YY's response about the book when those performed on stage. She was very small. That's why publication and documentation is very important for a theater, because always we know theater is something happens now in present. So it's hard to like those ephemeral moments to be captured. So some practitioners, they may have a lot of like queries or hesitation about how a document could be actually, how a performance can actually be documented, because performance itself is a one-time event. So it's hard to be like, even though you put it in a video format, it's not that performance. But still, I think through writing and through a perspective of interpret the performance, putting it in words with some perspective, and also like a viewpoint of viewing these performances is a good way to document it. So I really appreciate and also admire for such a wonderful publication to be able to present about what the drama was did for 20 years. Because in these 20 years of time, I think it's not a, I won't say it's a difficult time, but definitely it's not easy for theater company in Singapore. But Drama Box did a lot of like wonderful jobs and projects as well for the not only inspired, I think, the practitioners in Singapore, but also inspire a lot of like arts, like working in the field in Hong Kong or in some other Asian cities. So I think it's good to have a book not only published in Chinese, but also in English as well, because I think language and making narratives to be more accessible for readers is another strategy of making a theater visible, and to be able to, I think, not only benefit for the audience and readers right now, but also the readers for the future as well. So I think for a book publication, especially I'm really in the field of making like publishing books for Hong Kong theater as well. So I really admire that this is a very important journey for not only making productions, but we also have to archive and to document our works as well. And talking about a book, I think it's not only like collecting information and collecting like information is very important for a book. But I think what I could be learned from your publication is what I'm just mentioned about, is the dramaturgical thinking about making a book, because it's not only about information, it's how you interpret the information and also make the information to be used or to be able to engaged for the new readers and the new audience. So it's what I'm doing as well. So I'm really looking forward to learn more from the book. And of course, we are going to share a lot more about our thoughts about theaters later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bernice. Yeah, I mean, this book actually sort of finish up the 3 books that Drama Box had promised ourselves to publish, to work on. The first book was called 30 Keywords, which was both in English and in Mandarin, which was edited by Dr. Kwasiran. Look at Drama Box over the last 30 years of our history, how we evolved to what we are now. The second book, Changing Places, which we co-published it with Center for Performance Research in Wales, look specifically over the work that we've done over the last 10 to 12 years, the kind of socially engaged practice that we do over the last 10 to 12 years. Work that some audience may be familiar with, like Postsites Now, It Won't Be Too Long. But this book, which we promised ourselves to finish, finally it's done. So in this book, we capture the early 20 years of the work that we do. Hopefully that would give us a kind of, which actually gave us a very good opportunity as a company to review our process, to review our creation, and to ask ourselves, what's next? How do we stay relevant and immediate? And I thank both Bernice and Yan, and especially in this idea of archiving what a performance is in the theatre. I think they have also mentioned about the performance is not just in the theatre, but there is also a performance in the way the theatre is being made, how it's being made, the players who are in the making of this theatre, not just with the actors, but also with the various stakeholders that are involved in it, the various agencies. And that would actually immediately lead us to actually the topic today, the theatre and crisis. And we're not just talking about the crisis that happened within the play, but we're definitely talking about crisis that happens in the performance of making performance. And in fact, for today's Bernice talk, she will be actually doing a similar talk, maybe a longer one in Macau, I think next week, right, or 2 weeks later. It's interesting in that talk, they actually they did a poster, which I saw on Facebook, which uses Charles Dickens' Tales of Two Cities, which is an interesting thing for us to think about this crisis. And I quote from Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. I think when we look at this crisis, or when we say crisis, we are really looking at all this existing at the same time. I think we all have lived through COVID, but at the same time, let's not just only COVID that's on top of our head. Many things have happened over the years, from Black Lives Matters to all the various social unrest that happens in different parts of the world. Then there is new revolutions that happened through AI, through the internet, through digital space. Then at the same time, in the last, after COVID, all the various kind of wars that happened in various parts of the world, from Ukraine to currently, but Ukraine war has not ended yet and it's still going on. We have the things that are happening in Palestine and Gaza. And I think all this has informed, or even that is happening around us, and how does it actually affect the way we work as artists? Where is our place? what is our role and how do we actually respond to this, and how does it affect what we make and how we make. And so it is with this that actually we set up today's discussion. And it is also in response also to what the book is, because the book did cover the first 20 years of our work in response to the time where we were. And I think with that, that's why we thought that it would be interesting to take to ask friends from outside of Drama Box to talk about their experience rather than talking about Drama Box's experience. And with that, that's why I thought that we, both Howie and me, had a long discussion, and we thought that I think it would be good if we invite friends who have unique perspective and who have been in the middle of all this kind of crisis, to share their thoughts and their reflections on it. So to start the ball rolling, today we will have Yan Ying, who will share about her work, and through her work, her reflection on as a early career artist in this moment of crisis, how she responded and what she did. After Yan Ying, it will be Bernice, who will be doing an analysis, a SWOT analysis about what happened about Hong Kong theatre. And after that, we'll have Howie, who then looked at actually education, which is very important because in moment of crisis, education is important. Like what happens in arts education? And she will also reflect on some of the things that are happening around the world in terms of performance spaces. And then after that, we will have discussion, and then hopefully the audience can join us in the conversation. Each of our speaker will have 20 minutes, and I will direct message you when it's close to the time. And without further ado, maybe let's invite Yan Ying. Bye-bye. Over to you.
Thank you, Heng Leun, for that thoughtful introduction. Just give me a moment to share my screen. All right. Okay, can everyone see? Okay. Hi, so today I'll be sharing from my vantage point as an early career theatre director and creator. I've been working professionally in the industry for about 10 years now. It's been about 5 years since I was out of undergrad. I'm mostly a freelancer, and I also do part-time arts administration at a dance company in Singapore. I'm presently based in Singapore, although I occasionally do works in New York as well, where I lived in for 5 years. And because of the availability of the online space, I still occasionally collaborate with New York-based artists over the virtual platform. Because I'm mostly a theatre maker, what I'll be able to do is provide some practical perspectives from the angles of case studies of projects that I've done over the last few years. Who's there? Who are you? Bloodlines, Xuan Mai, and where are you? And I know the titles for some of these sound quite similar, but they're just the big questions that have been reverberating through me over the last few years. So the first project that I will talk about is Who's There, that ran from 4 to 8 August 2020. And this was an online digital production that I co-directed and co-led with Alvin Tan, artistic director of The Necessary Stage. Although this one was presented by New Ohio Theatre's Ice Factory Festival in New York. Unfortunately, the theatre no longer exists, but we were grateful to have that sliver in time during the pandemic where we could put up this production. This was an international collaboration between 13 artists across 8 cities and 5 time zones, including Singapore, New York, Kuala Lumpur, Budapest, Texas, and California, and others as well, during the height of COVID, when all of us were in lockdown at all these various parts of the world. And through this production, we delved into the political events and racial controversies that also erupted that same year across US, Singapore, and Malaysia, some of which were the Black Lives Matter protests, which gained a lot of traction in the US, as well as the addressing the lack of healthcare and infrastructural support for the migrant community in Singapore during the pandemic. And with this work, we were also very interested in what digital possibilities can afford us at a time when a lot of people were lamenting about the loss of in-person live theatre, not being able to feel that community and connection. That we completely recognized, and we wanted to see how we can still create a sense of liveness through the virtual space, as well as how instead of force fitting an existing theatre play into the online medium, how do we create something entirely from scratch with this online platform of Zoom and use very simple things like virtual background or like Snapchat filters or screen sharing? How can we use these as tools and functions for storytelling and to ask the questions that we want to ask? So some things that I will chat briefly about. I think it's important for me to be transparent about the framework that we were working under as well. So the budget that we were actually working with was, we were given a stipend of USD 750 from New Ohio Theatre, who very generously programmed us in the festival. But of course, times are difficult. And so that 750 USD was split among the 13 of us. Alvin and I had also topped up cash from our own personal pockets. And eventually we were able to pay our collaborators each USD $200, which was nowhere near commensurate, to the time and labor that they were putting in. This, the rehearsal period, creation period, all of it was a very compact 2-month process in June and July, where we met like 3-4 times a week online to discuss and create and generate content, but also a lot of work offline done as well. And one of the interesting things about working across different time zones is that the work never stops, because when I go to sleep, I submit the new draft of the script to my multimedia designer. Then when I wake up, my multimedia designer would have something for me, and then we'll pass it on back and forth. Like the baton was constantly being passed. And so it's kind of like a never-ending cycle of work. And it is quite surreal. And I want to acknowledge that this work and this framework we were working under also happened at a very specific period of time, which was during the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown. Many of us had, lost our other projects and jobs, or they had to be postponed. So that's why we could sit in front of our screen pretty much all day and commit to it as sort of a passion project. And because this also gave us opportunity to form connections with each other and still retain a sense of community in this moment of isolation. One thing I'll mention as well is the absence of Singapore state censorship in this work, because this was a project that was first and foremost presented by an American theatre company. So we did not apply for any NAC grant funding as well. It was kind of, the inception was from New York, essentially, although more than half the collaborators were actually Singaporeans, which is quite interesting. And we talked about a lot of Singaporean themes and issues. But I think some of them expressed, because I had been in New York for about like 5 years by then. So I had forgotten what is it like to be under IMDA regulation and censorship. But a lot of collaborators expressed that it felt quite surreal to not have to be thinking about these things and not have to submit the script, for licensing and all that, and to be able to say whatever we want quite freely. And we are the only people holding ourselves accountable for that speech and whatever we want to put out there, which is refreshing. And I think at that point, IMDA, which is the Singapore like licensing body, or rather censorship body, had not caught up with online digital works yet. So they also didn't know how to navigate this kind of no man's land of online virtual theatre. Other things that we thought about was the burden of representation, because there were 6 performers here. Each of us came from a completely different intersection of identities. So it's kind of like we were the only one, sometimes we were the only one representing a particular community on this world stage. So there were some audience members who expressed that, because we were representing that community on the world stage, there is a responsibility for us to, in a way, put our best foot forward. But we were more interested in delving into the complex, oftentimes flawed and fractured ways that we relate to each other from our own sets of identities. So that was an interesting point of contention that came up during a lot of the post-show dialogues as well. One thing we're also thinking about is the responsibility of political theatre, because as you might have guessed, we opened up a lot of can of worms about these things that happened during the pandemic, a lot of these difficult conversations, and we didn't propose any sort of tangible solutions. The work eventually, as time went on, evolved into something that was more metaphorical and abstract. And so, there's the lingering question of what is your responsibility when you open up these kind of worms and put these problems on stage? How much do you have to, propose a tangible solution or pack it nicely, or, propose something tangible in a sense. Whereas we went into something that was more metaphorical and abstract when envisioning the new normal that might have been possible after COVID. With this work, we also found new possibilities for audience interaction. During the show, we used the poll function quite a bit, where we asked difficult questions like, do racists deserve empathy? And then audiences could vote yes or no. Or violent protests are sometimes necessary, agree or disagree. And within the 15 seconds, all audience members had to vote something, and then the poll results will be instantly reflected. And so you get a sense of what the values and principles of the other audience members in the space as well. And sometimes the results can be quite shocking, or you might not have expected it. So that's different from the live theatre experience, where sometimes in conventional settings, you're sitting next to a person, but you have no idea what they're thinking or feeling while experiencing the show. So this online platform actually allowed us, the possibility to get a glimpse into that. Our post-show dialogues often ran as long as the show itself, which was about an hour, 40 minutes. And our show times, because of according for time zones, they were like 10 a.m. Singapore, 10 p.m. New York, and vice versa. So we had some audience members even stay up to like 1 a.m. Singapore to continue this conversation with us, also understanding everyone was in lockdown at that point. And, being able to speak verbally on Zoom or via chat box if they were more comfortable with it, it allowed for very enriching conversations to happen in parallel and in tension with each other as well. So here are just some quick pictures of snapshots. We didn't have to pay for a photographer because we could just screenshot it. So photographer credit goes to me for this one. The next one I'll talk about is Bloodlines Share Mai, which was a work in progress that ran from 7 to 9 January 2022. And I co-led this project with Cynthia Chen, who is a multidisciplinary artist from Taiwan and New York. This was presented by Faultline Theatre's Irons in the Fire series, which is a new work development platform in New York. Oftentimes they workshop new plays, new scripts, but they really took a chance on Cynthia and I with this one, where we just submitted a 12-page proposal and talked about what we wanted to explore. And, they believed in the possibility of this digital experience and gave us the platform to do it. This was an international collaboration between 7 artists from Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, and the US. And we were interested in investigating the volatility and promise of Chineseness, something that Cynthia and I have been chatting about since we first met in New York and decided to embark on an artistic project of it together. So some of the interesting things that arose was Chinese as an identity. And for me, I had taken for granted that, I just identify as Singaporean Chinese. Like, it's very easy. But whereas when early on, in our conversations, we realized that this is a very fraught term, and not all our collaborators are comfortable with identifying themselves as Chinese. Because for me, Chinese first and foremost means ethnicity within the environment I've grown up with in. Whereas for some of my collaborators, the idea of nationality was very strongly enmeshed in the term Chinese. So they might prefer to refer to themselves as Hong Kongian or Taiwanese for understandable reasons. We also recognize that there's a lot of political and historical information, that can be put into this work, because Chinese-ness, it's such a huge and wide-scale project. But for this first work in progress sharing, we decided to zoom into our individual experiences of what that means, our relationship to Chineseness, because even within 6 people, there's a lot you can already talk about from that perspective. And also acknowledging that the personal is also political. So just by confronting our own identities and just by tracing our own ancestral lineage, finding the moments of resonance and parallel, that already provided a lot of insights. We also had to, in a way, discuss measures that we would take to ensure collaborators' safety. We had a collaborator who was in mainland China while creating this work. So, he had advised us not to send sensitive information over WhatsApp, because he really might just be stopped on the streets and his phone might be checked. But then he said Google Drive is okay, because usually they won't go all the way into Google Drive and dig into the folders to find things. So, we had to set these very tangible rules and limitations for ourselves. And as well as our collaborators from Hong Kong, with the introduction of the national security law, we had to take steps to ensure their safety as well and check in with them as to what they feel comfortable presenting and not. And then maybe presenting some of it in more poetic ways, more abstracted ways. And with this virtual platform, the ability to also create a secret backdoor room, actually, that we hosted some of these information in. We were working under a budget of $3,000, split among the 7 of us. that was given by Fault Line Theatre. They were very supportive and encouraging, but we really just made do with what we did lah. And using the OYE platform, which was an interactive virtual experience platform where you can like create your own rooms. So this was the foyer room that audience members would land in first. They would pull where they're tuning in from. They can click on these luggage bags to explore, each of our digital artifacts in relation to Chineseness. They could chat on the chat box and get a sense of who else is in the space. This was a moment, a poetic kind of scene where we spoke about relationship to Chineseness. This is a sound sampling moment where Sam, our sound artist, collated sort of sound bites from audiences in relation to like, what does Chineseness sound like to you? So he took all these various sound bites and then kind of meshed them into a soundtrack, which I was honestly quite impressed by. And then we ended the entire experience. It was, I think, about 75 minutes probably, with a Jamboard session where we collated responses from the audience. And it was really wonderful to see these responses. And you can kind of guess, that people came from different parts of the world do their responses as well. So I'm not sure if I have time to share a 2-minute video, Heng Yuan, or should I move forward? Can
You have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay. Then maybe I'll skip this video section and then I'll move on to talking about the next show. Yeah. So okay. So who are you? This is a live theatre show on 7 August 2022. It was presented by the Esplanade's Red Dot Festival in collaboration with the Migrant Writers of Singapore, MWS. And this was a devised one-act play that examined migrant-local relationships in Singapore and the identity of the other. A very lean team, 3 local performers, 3 migrant performers, director and playwright was myself, a sound designer, as well as a stage manager. And we had a stipend of $800 to make this work. And Esplanade also give us a little bit of budget for props and not much set, we just like really loaned, and very grateful to SRT, Singapore Repertory Theatre, for also lending us rehearsal space pro bono to do this, because otherwise, there was nowhere else that we could rehearse. So interestingly, we were working on this play, devised it from mid-May to early August 2022. And we met only every Sunday because that usually is our collaborators' day off. So we will start by meeting for half days on Sundays, which eventually evolved into full days. So kind of working within that framework as well. Sometimes it might be that Adore, who works in a refinery, has to work an overnight shift at the last minute and might not be able to come for rehearsal. So we needed to adapt to things like that too when working with more underrepresented communities. This project actually came about because Zakir Hussein Kokan, who was the founder of Migrant Writers of Singapore, got this opportunity from Esplanade, and he reached out to me because he was interested in creating a play, which MWS hadn't done on this scale before. Oftentimes, it was a lot of like spoken word poetry or readings, but he wanted to explore the possibility of building a play together. And so we decided to embark on it, even though the timeline was very short. One of the road bumps we ran into midway was that Zakir's work permit was not able to be renewed. And so he was essentially deported quite suddenly from Singapore, which was a huge shock to us. We hadn't expected it, especially someone that we were collaborating closely with over time. And the reasons that MOM cited were an adverse record with a government agency, just simply said that it was ineligible for renewal. And I found this interesting. We renewed his work past many times despite his activisms and writings. And the notion that he has overstayed his welcome, which I felt was, in my perspective, quite careless and awful. But we had to reconvene and decide how to move forward with it. And we decided that, okay, we wanted to push ahead with this production. Although there were concerns over safety as well, because of, the proximity Zakir had to the show, and thus the other migrants involved, and not wanting to put their livelihoods at stake too. So we had to tread carefully on that end. Decided to focus more on the relationships between migrants and locals in Singapore, and not so much a direct critique of government policies as well, which everyone actually was quite happy with and decided to commit in that direction. The possibility of friendships and positive relationships that can arise between migrants and locals. This will also happen in the concourse venue. So even though there might have been interruptions here and there with moving traffic, but it removed the barriers to entry of ticket prices, so anyone could come watch. And we also got a lot of curious onlookers and spectators who watched for a bit and then decided to sit down and enjoy the rest of it. So it ended up being quite a full audience in that sense. A lot of camaraderie and friendship that arose as well. Subsequent collaborations, I know like Sonia, Rachel Nip, Jay Ong, the sound designer, and Adore over here eventually collaborated on a subsequent project too, which I was really happy to witness. So just some pictures. Okay, so I will wrap up here and this one I won't talk about it so much. I think it's just another kind of cross-cultural international collaboration examining grief in a more universal angle. So one thing that was interesting is that this topic of grief, how it's approached with collaborators in New York versus online during the pandemic when grief took on a new and enormous significance. And then in Singapore when state intervention is quite involved, even in our experience of grief and dealing with death and mortality. So we talked a lot about the state and regulations and policies in the Singapore version of it. And we didn't talk about it at all in New York. So that was just something that was quite interesting to witness, as well as the cross-pollination of ideas that was possible across cities as well. Just to conclude, some questions. Digital spaces as opportunities for international collaborations and exchange. Why are we not taking advantage of this more? It's also a question for myself, when I've seen so much potential that it can afford. Cutting your carbon footprints too, and not having to factor in travel and accommodation costs. So why are we not leveraging on this more? So I'm glad for this afternoon's panel discussion because it's also another kind of international collaboration. You can do a lot with very little, but to what extent? And where do you draw the line? When is it worth it? Notably, a lot of these projects that I've shared were on more sort of like a self-producing basis. So we're working under very, very limited resources. So how far should you go? You can actually do a lot within that, but also respecting your collaborators' time, respecting that this is labor. People should be paid commensurate to their time. So how much do you expect of your collaborators and of your own self and your own energies and efforts when doing these passion projects? But then at the same time, when is it worth it to cross that line and to really input, all your energy and efforts into it? So something I always think about is the triangulation of people pay project when deciding whether or not to take on a project. So these projects that I've talked about, they often fulfill the people and project criteria, but pay unfortunately is absent. And it is also quite interesting, that we always have to work within this framework. We can't have it all. So, but can we actually, can we build a future where we can actually have it all, pay people and project? How can we modify and adapt mainstream theatre practices and expectations when working with underrepresented communities? Like in the case of working with the migrants community, only rehearsing on Sundays for half day, so at least they get a break for the rest of the day, full day, and respecting their time, respecting when people need to pull sudden overnight shifts. How do we modify these mainstream theatre expectations? And a personal question. These folks, interestingly, have not run into any concerns with IMDA, although, tangentially, they have encountered controversies in their own way. So is there a need to push the envelope more? But at the same time, there are considerations as well. For example, protecting the safety of collaborators and of myself. And in certain cases, like on digital works, the fact that you're able to actually bypass some of these censorship and regulations too. So that's something that I will continue to explore further. I will end here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, YY. Thank you for the sharing. I think by looking through all this work, I picked 4 things. One, and in those moments of isolation and lack of resources, how the scope of collaboration comes in for us to work together in collaborations across borders. Secondly, at the same time, in digital world, it is quite isolated in a way. But yet, because I saw that work that you did, where you had to do the poll, and I did the poll also. So there is a certain level of interactivity that actually, which you want the audience to to sort of move beyond the screen. So how important is interactivity there? But then at the same time, with such interactivity and collaboration, you bring in this idea of actually care and safety, which is important in this moment of crisis because people are in a state of actually sometimes in difficult positions. And lastly, of course, amidst of all these things, uh, how transgressive should the work be? Must all work be transgressive? And what are the ways for it to be transgressive? Or does it end only being agitational? Uh, I think these are very important questions for us to think. And I think with that, from YY being a freelancer who is making a work with her own community and people around her, let's move to Hong Kong. Let's move to Bernice and hear Bernice's experience in Hong Kong. I think we all are aware of what happens in Hong Kong over the last few years, including at this moment where they are passing the bill of the Article 23. And I think Bernice being deep in there, working closely with policymakers, working very closely with practitioners, she will have an insight on the development of Hong Kong theatre at this moment. Over to you, Bernice.
Thank you so much, Heng Lang, for your invitation. And it's really a good chance for me to share about the Hong Kong situation right now. And it's really glad to be here. And also, it's a quick response before I present what I've prepared about what I just learned about from YY. Because online performances and during the COVID, is really in Hong Kong, we have developed a lot of experience about working on online performances. And for IATC, we also have a chance to receive a funding from the Hong Kong Arts Council to do a research of how many performances actually presented online during the COVID for the 2 years time. And after we have actually compiled an online database about the number of performances presented online. You can check it on our IITC website. And what the observation is I think those experience is hard to be like accumulate right now after the COVID, because afterwards I think we are more we tend to more like to go to a show, to go to the theater, to experience the liveness in the theater. So I think after the COVID, the online performances present in Hong Kong, I think I almost say it's none online now. So it's really interesting to know the situation in Singapore. And also you mentioned about the absence of censorship, those things. I think it's also some of our discussion during the COVID time when we can we actually present some of the topics online? Would that be another alternative for our practitioner to express themselves freely? There's something really we did a lot of discussion during the COVID. And also, I think it's very interesting as well, because I have a very personal experience of engaging in online performances. And I think I'm a kind of an idiot of using like different apps. You know, for these online performances, some of them, they really require you to use a computer well at some point, or you need to download some apps that I am not familiar with. But it's also a good experience for me as well during the COVID for the online performances. So it's really good to know the situation from YY's sharing. And I think maybe Han Zhong can share the PowerPoint for me. It's my presentation for today, and I'm sure that we will have more fruitful discussion later on. I'm going to review the situation of Hong Kong theatre through SWOT analysis. And what Heng Lan just mentioned about the presentation that I'm going to do in Macau 2 weeks time later on, and it's a SWOT analysis as well, but for theatre, performing arts criticism in particular. And the next slide, please. I think SWOT analysis is a very useful tool and also model for me to have a look over the situation now in Hong Kong. And talking about the strengths, I think Hong Kong is always East meets West Center for International and Cultural Exchange. I think definitely now in Hong Kong, we can still be able to access to Google and many kind of social medias. So I think it's for Hong Kong, it's still we are very proud of our position of being able to present a lot of international events in Hong Kong. And of course, after the COVID, I think more international events I think more international events will be presented in Hong Kong, because I think the government as well, and also for our theatre practitioners, are looking forward to rebuild the situation in Hong Kong, because during the COVID time, we stopped a lot of or suspend a lot of performances. So I think for this year, like Hong Kong Arts Festival and many other international festivals, they are coming back for more performances, and a lot of cultural exchange is looking forward to be presented in Hong Kong. And of course, Hong Kong is a Cantonese-speaking theatre, and I think 90% of our productions on stage are in Cantonese. It's a Cantonese production, and some people, I really learned from some critics when they visit our theaters, they kind of sense there's a Hong Kong style on theater. I think maybe from some Hong Kong movies as well. From Zhou Xingqi, you must know about what Hong Kong style is about, or maybe you can interpret what Hong Kong style by yourself. But in fact, Hong Kong speaking theater, I think now in Hong Kong, not only important for our local audience, but also for the audience from the Greater Bay Area, from China, in particular for the young generation and people who are interested about our culture, are really looking forward to see a Cantonese speaking performance on stage, instead of we presenting the show in Mandarin. I think this important insight for us is a very good I think an important point for us to why we need to do theater in Hong Kong and what kind of language that we are using. And I think we should bear this in mind. It's not something that we will never give up. I think it's one of our very important strengths for our theater in the future. The next slide, please. Next. So after the strength, I would like to share with you about the weaknesses. And I will going to present it in two different aspects. One is on creation and another one is on audience building. In Hong Kong, most of our venues are operated by the government. If you have chance to come to Hong Kong, Heng must be very familiar with our venues in Hong Kong, and it makes a little bit difficult for us to present our shows outside the spectrum of public venues. And first of all, is because under those venues, under these governmental venues, there is a lot of we can only occupy the venues in a short period of time, because we have to give the chance to other practitioners fairly. So even though your show is very popular, or be able to do a long run show, so it's really hard for you to occupy government operated venues for a long run show. So it really makes our shows, if you would like to make it big or to make it more in a long run basis, it creates a lot of difficulties, because venue itself, you cannot easily present a show in those venues. So it creates a lot of even though we have opportunities to make shows in the long run, in terms of box office and the audience, but still physically you can't get the venue very easily in Hong Kong. So it's always our weakness in Hong Kong to be present a show on stage. And the other one is the lack of diversified resources or funding. like the venues, most of our fundings are still rely on government. Like the Hong Kong Arts Development Council is one of a very important source of funding for the local theatre practitioners. No matter you are applying for their like IATC that I'm now working for, we are a 3-year grantee from the Hong Kong Arts Development Council, or you can apply a project grant from the council as well. And for the private sector, it's very difficult for the private enterprise to support theaters, because theater is still a very niche kind of a culture for Hong Kong compared to film or some other cultural events. So it's but except for music and also for Cantonese opera. What I'm just talking about is in particular for drama and theater. And so it's really hard for us to strike the balance between, if you receive fundings from the government, then maybe if there is some issue or some things happened, your funding will be affected. So it's create a lot of like anxiety for a practitioner as well, whether you should continue receive funding from the government, or you may hardly survive in a context of Hong Kong. So it's, I think for me, it's also a weakness as well for our theatre practitioners. And the loss of theatre practitioner, what I mentioned about this is because after the COVID and also after the social events or the movement happened in Hong Kong few years, I think in 2019, there's a lot of like theatre practitioners. They need to have there's a lot of reason for them to not being able to to create their work in Hong Kong. So they decided to go somewhere else to find more job opportunities. And also I think COVID is also another like drive for those theatre practitioners to think if there will be some other chance for them to work not only in Hong Kong but for other places as well. So I think for the loss of theatre practitioners, that creates a lot of like there's still an issue that we need to like encounter, because there's in particular for some areas like theatre education and also for the technical theatre workers are those two kind of jobs that they can be easily find overseas. So I think it's great issues that we are now encountering as well for Hong Kong. And the little awareness of archiving is something that I also think very important for us now, because in Hong Kong, archiving or to document our work is not something that we have a great awareness of. And now in particular, because of the difficult situation in Hong Kong, and I think some of our productions, maybe after the presentation on stage, it's hard for them to like keep their even though they would like to keep the record, maybe they may not be able to like show on a line, or some productions, maybe they think they have some sensitive issues, they can be removed from the website easily. So I think for this archival materials that could be able to find for the how this information could be able to find is something that we really need to think about. And also I think is little resources for our Arts Council as well, for us to support our theatre companies to do their archive. So I think it's really something that we really need to focus on for IATC, we have a lot of like projects to try to advocate and also try to bring a lot of like awareness for the theater practitioners to keep their own archives. I think it's very important as well, in particular for this particular period of time in Hong Kong, how to document our shows, to keep it in a very like in a strategic way is something that we really need to think of. And also for audience building, the loss of theater audiences is something that happened really after the COVID and after the movement, because many people decided to maybe not to live in Hong Kong, or they decided to have some other opportunities in other countries. So you can see we can still have a way to go to build up some other new audience, but it takes time. It just takes time. And the next slide that would like to talk about is on the opportunities. What I just mentioned about is we now have a clearer picture of Hong Kong's of government's policy on developing Hong Kong into international cultural exchange as a hub for the cultural exchange. So with that policy, we have a lot of like resources and also new projects funding from the government directly. So it's definitely opportunity for our theatre practitioners. And also the market and space for Greater Bay Area is something that we are now focusing on. I would like to take an example as there's recently a musical called The Impossible Trial, presented by the West Kowloon and with the Hong Kong Repertory Theatre. And this makes a really good response and also receive a lot of good response from the young generation of audience. And also not only in Hong Kong, but a lot of audience, they came to Hong Kong for this particular musical. This musical was presented in Cantonese. It's a Cantonese original musical. And also they are now trying to make it in a bigger scale. They decided to in 2025, this musical is going to tour like in China, in a lot of cities in China. So definitely the market and also the space in China is an opportunities for our theater. And also the possibility of co-producing. What I just mentioned about the Impossible Trial is a co-produced production. And also I think those co-producing model will also happen in not only within Hong Kong, but also some of our opportunities to be able to work with international like collaborators. I think YY just mentioned about there will be a lot of opportunities for us as well for co-producing works with the neighbor cities. And new and young audience from China. I think by observation we can see newly a lot of like audience from the young generation and from China. They would like to come to Hong Kong to see the shows because definitely they can see some interesting and inspiring shows in Hong Kong. So I think that will be another new waves for us to develop our audience based on that particular population. And creation under restriction. I think with Howard's book and also from the experience of Singapore, I always think with restriction, maybe it could make our mind more creative. So I'm really looking forward that there will be our opportunities. And revisit the classics is something I think recently we more and more theatre practitioners are looking forward to make their stories or interpretation out of classics. And I think there's a way for us to speak what is happening now, and maybe the classic we can find a way out. And the last slide that I would like to share about is about the threats of definitely competition from other Asian cities like Singapore. Is it's also our threats. So we really, maybe we are not competitors, we are collaborators. I should put it like in the opportunities, because for sure there will be more resources to be able to share and experience to share. But yes, there's something we really need to focus on. And the other thing is new cultural venues in the Greater Bay Area, because Hong Kong, we always have a problem of space. And like in Greater Bay Area, I know there's a lot of like upcoming cultural venues to be finished in 10 years time. So there will be our threats as well. And the implementation of the solid waste charging. I would like to talk about this because we are going to pay for our own garbage, I think in August. And in Hong Kong, I think for the theater, we really need to think about what green theater is about. And I think in Taiwan, there's a lot of like policies already discussed about theater with sustainability. But in Hong Kong, still, we have a very little discussion on this. And I think to be able to make our theater more like for the future development, we really need to think about this. And really, we need to start a lot of discussion. And of course, it's not only one theater company or one policy could make it possible, because it's a collective, that should be something to be done in a collective way. So I think I'll be more like interested to know more about this in future. And also the law and sensitive topics is something that recently that we are encountered, and Heng just mentioned about. And of course, I think maybe that's the worst of time, but on the other hand, it's also our chance to think how we are going to tell our story. So it always another good time. Maybe there's a good time for us as well in terms of like creative. And fragmentation of information is the last point that I would like to share about, because of the use of social media, that a lot of our practitioners tend to promote their work through the IG and also the Facebook. And I think in particular IG nowadays, but for us as a theater critics that would like to collect information, and online information is somehow really hard to be collect and to be able to document, and they could be easily disappeared. So I think the fragmentation and loss of information is something that I am really concerned about. And in particular, of course, for promotion, that would be easier for you to reach your audience. But at the same time, if you are not following certain IG, you may not be able to grasp those information. So, and also because of that AI or the IG, you will never know what kind of information that you are going to receive. So it's actually, you are not being a proactive way to promote your work. I think relatively you are in a more passive way to receive information that creates also a lot of like threats for our promotion and also marketing, but also for the information collecting as well. And last slide, last but not least, I think we need more patience. I think we need more patience in Hong Kong. We need to think, and we need to have more strategy as well. It takes us more time, so patience is really important. And I think we need more wisdom to be able to encounter such a difficult situation now in Hong Kong, and we will never lose our hope. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernice. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking as you're talking about is this concept of a Boalian crisis from Augusto Boal. He borrowed this idea of crisis actually from the Chinese character Wei Ji, which means when there's a moment of danger, there's a moment of opportunity. I think in your representation, you are constantly actually dialectically thinking between when is an opportunity and when is a threat, and when can the threat become an opportunity. When do we change the way we look at restriction into the idea of limitation, which Pao Kun, Kuo Pao Kun had alluded quite a lot of time that we work with limitations rather than thinking them as restrictions. Of course, it is always difficult time in those moments, and what kind of space does artists have? And I think both Yan Ying as well as Bernice have talked a lot about this idea of space, whether it's space within an infrastructure or space in the cyber world, or are there other kind of space that we can operate as an artist that allow us to venture and then try new things. And and the idea of archives is really interesting. So the thing is that what is it that we archive? Do we archive what happened or what could not happen? Uh, Now I'm going back to Howie. Hopefully, then Howie will, as an academic, I'm pretty sure he has his thoughts about what Bernice and YY has said. But I've realized I've not introduced Howie properly. Howie is a playwright, a scholar. He is now a lecturer at the School of Humanities in University of Westminster and co-founder of ACPC, Association of Curators and Programmers of Asian Cinemas. He writes about theater, he writes about cinema, he writes about cultural phenomenon, and I think it's really nice to have Howie to actually respond to both of them as well as his own thoughts about this theater and crisis. Over to you, Howie.
Thank you so much, Heng Leun. So I will try to make good use of the time to talk about the trap I've set for myself, theater and crisis, and also respond to what YY and Bernice have discussed. So both of you have stressed the importance of archiving in various ways, so have Heng Leun. I'd like to begin with a quick quote from the book called, or the article called The Past Web, the book by Daniel Gomez, Elena Demidova, and Jane Winters, and Thomas Rees. So they talk about the current situation that we live in. It's a very interesting era where, quote, never before in the history of humankind has so much information been produced, so much information been so widely available, and so much information been irreparably lost forever. So we are losing as much as we produce as we speak, if that makes sense. The issue of archiving, I have actually talked about in the book. So that was a very different time. We're looking at the materiality of space and archiving with regards to Drama Box. So I had the frustration of not being able to consult some of the materials due to issues of rain and flooding in the premises of Drama Box. Now this problem has been resolved, and it's, like I said many times before, it's great to see a theatre company now paying more attention to archiving. We're also looking into, coming up with records that we can fall back on, classics that we can reinterpret for the future. So I'd like to go to my slides. Han Chong, please. Yeah. And I'll also again try to address some of the concerns raised by YY and Bernice. So in the field of theatre, all of us are in some way linked to education because we try to think about the world in different ways. And I think that this leads me to think about academia as someone working in research and education. So I'd like to begin by talking about what it means to be talking about crisis and theatre through the lenses of education, academia, and the creative arts. So in the last 10 years or so, there has been the problem of the arts and humanities under the constant threat in British higher education. There is a long list of universities which have been faced with threats of redundancies or with cuts and so on. So these universities include Brighton all the way to Hull, Lincoln, Gimmerey, Sheffield, Hallam, and also where I did my PhD, SOAS University of London. Just so you know, Hull actually had a very vibrant School of Southeast Asian Studies, but that was shut down when I was working there. All that was left was actually an archive of what was a legacy of like artifacts of Southeast Asian culture, primarily made up of wayang kulit from Indonesia. So all these puppetry, shadow puppets, props, and figures. So I don't know whether that room is still existing. Perhaps it's now gone to a museum somewhere in England. Yeah, so why does this matter? Because when we think about the conversation we're having today, all of us having benefited from education, whether trained as practitioners, critics, directors, actors, or researchers, we would think about the people who have inspired, the books that have made us think about the world in a different way, and also the possibilities of collaborating with someone who's been educated in the arts and humanities. So, in the last, since 2023, more than 20 universities, up to about 25, the situation has worsened or remained the same. So when we talk about in similar or worse situation, we're talking about precarity, what it means for our education. And this relates to the issue of labor, effective labor that Yan Ying has brought up. So in the fields of education, arts, humanities, and also perhaps jobs that involve people to people, person-to-person contact, where you changing of mindsets. We think about how the arts and humanities foster debate, dialogue, and the capacity to construct and dismantle arguments. But it is also interesting whenever there's a crisis, the arts and humanities are required, are demanded that we should scale back to make way for something else. It is also interesting. I am aware I speak from a very London-centric lenses and a Singaporean based background. So if you think about Britain being a service economy in which the creative sectors represent 5.6%, I hate to be speaking in such neoliberal terms, but sometimes it might be easier for people who can only appreciate figures to make sense of things. The creative industry, so we are looking at the creative industry sector taking up 5.6% of the GDP. The creative industries are not only growing, contributing a record of £109 billion in 2021, according to the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in the UK. So it is also interesting to note that the UK is the largest exporter of books in the world. So with all this happening in the background, we are still being asked to scale back, cut down, dumb down, right? So, and it needs to mention that London's vibrant West End benefits from the stream of graduates, many of whom have are educated in the arts and humanities and creative and performing arts. So, yeah, I'd like us to think about this crisis that's lurking in the background. As much as we talk about, it's important to perform, it's important to archive, it might also be helpful to think about what it means for researchers or educators in the classrooms, in labs, in archives, and museums, trying to salvage of what we have and the effective labor that we are being asked to provide more for less. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so theatre and crisis, I'd like to talk about state funding cuts, rethinking, which gives us an opportunity to rethink performance spaces. Now, despite our reliance on technology, I think we can all agree that the state still figures significantly in our lives, whether in terms of censorship, in terms of funding, funding of public services, the arts and education, right? And I think, Bernice, you mentioned that the state still constitutes the major funding source for Hong Kong theatre. So this is quite interesting in the case of Drama Box, where the company has tried to diversify its funding sources and try not to be held hostage to one particular funding body so that you'll be asked to make changes whenever the occasion arises. So I'd like to use this example, which I find somewhat funny, but also not too funny, right? Nissan Dorma. I think some of us might be familiar with this very this signature tune, this seminal tune that Pavarotti always sings, like Nessun Dorma. All right, so Nissan Dorma, it's a punny play on the word Nessun. So the Arts Council Chair Darren Henley says that the future of opera lights in parks and pubs. Now, the context is just not too long ago, the Arts Council demanded that the English National Opera, all right, this is like the 国宝, the national treasure of the very main. You can't get more mainstream than English National Opera. And there's also something quite interesting about, translating German and French, Italian language operas into English. I will not go into that, otherwise I'll go into a rant. So this is interesting because in a 3-year settlement announced some time back, the council cut the ENO's 12.8 million annual grant to zero, saying that you have to move out of the capital in order to be considered for funding in the next round starting in 2026. So but in return, it offered ENO 17 million to help with relocation costs and devise a new the business plan. So this is also in the context of the government wanting to level up. London takes out a lot of resources, a lot of performing spaces, groups are gathered in London. So they want to diversify and divert resources away from London to organizations across the country as part of its leveling up program. All right. We can discuss the details of this another time, but I think we want to go back to the context of Singapore or the greater Sinophone world to make sense of what this means. Now, when we think about theatre in crisis, we think about how the state owns certain spaces as well, right? Important proscenium theatres or even, black box theatres. So most of theatre is still staged within conventional venues and almost indoors. So I'm going to read a little bit from my book. Now, in its community projects, Drama Box addresses the question of whether theatre is enough by freeing it from the constraints of prosceniums and black box theatres and entering open, public, and unconventional spaces such as parks, cemeteries, and hospitals. So, unquote. Now, just a bit of context. I would like to, as much as it is true that this book is a translation, it has also been edited, and more stuff has been included in the book. So what I read now, is actually the new foreword that you will find in the book. So, quote, in considering strategies for its continued existence, Drama Box not only focuses on financial viability and prudence, the company's refashioning of unconventional spaces for theatre performances increases both audience outreach and social impact, and it's now part of its holistic and methodological approach to sustainability, unquote. So Yan Ying were talking about the importance of digital spaces and freeing up, spaces or giving opportunities to people from different parts of the world to come together, and that includes audiences to articulate issues and perhaps also circumventing the restrictions of censorship. And I think that's important. So it's nice to say when you have censors trying to play a bit of a catch up, but so eventually they might catch up. On the other hand, it also leads me to think about the live presence of a space, which Guo Pao Kun has mentioned before. He talks a lot about how it is important for people to come together and gather in space. And he feels that, despite he was talking in a time around the mid-1990s when the internet has been just introduced and made available. So he would not have imagined the idea of space is possible in today's time, where we can collaborate on Zoom, collaborate digitally to create new performances. What he makes of that, I don't know. Maybe he approves of it. And what this means for sustainability, in my book, I think about space. I think about how whether this approach allows Drama Box to maximize its impact, vitality, and creativity. So I think whether it's Goli Goli, the inflatable pop-up theater that Drama Box can deflate, fold down, and then bring to different housing estates, or whether it is in cemeteries or hospitals, I think it is increasingly important to think about how we can work with different organizations. Theatre practitioners must think beyond, just the state. There must be other organizations you can work with, whether it is collaborations with migrant workers, whether it is with a particular community or a certain demographic. So now I think in the interest of time, I will move on to theater and AI. Yeah. So the next slide, please. I'm sure some of us might feel this constant nagging behind, oh, AI might take our jobs, as they have already taken over done so for voiceover artists, for screenwriters, for copywriters, right? But I'd like to end perhaps on a more positive, optimistic note and think about multidisciplinarity. And this thing about multidisciplinary art has been going on for many, many years. But what it means when we talk about AI, I think I'd like to use the example of Yishun is Burning. This was one of the main shows in Queer East, a queer arts festival that's based in London, led by Wang Yi. Okay, he's a very dynamic and creative curator and festival programmer. So Yishun is Burning is inspired by the seminal documentary called Paris is Burning. So I'm not going to talk about what Paris is Burning is about, but very briefly, it's a documentary that focuses on drag queens living in New York City and their house culture. So in this production called Yishun is Burning, it's so fascinating. You have like shamanism meets voguing, and choreographers Choi Kar-Fai's fascinating, scintillating queer adaptation of Singaporean ritual dance. So they are actually collaborating with they actually collaborated with Norwegian Thai dancer San Pitaya Fei Fong. So it shifts between states of ecstasy, trance, and drag. Oh, what is also interesting is in this production, they also have a documentary about shamanism dance culture in Asia. So there is this temple, Taoist temple in Yishun, Singapore, and they documented the rituals of it. So that allows us to think about, okay, so there's this collaboration going on, grassroots culture, there's religion that's being brought in, that's community as well, because we're talking about devotees going to this temple for many years. And also, we're looking at how this dancer, all right, San Pitaya Fei Fong is actually using AI. You can see this blue projection, the figurine in the background. So every time he dances, the figurine will respond. So, and then there is also the collaboration between the Singaporean Malay band Nada and the Chinese drama Cheryl Ong. So a lot of multidisciplinarity is going on in this production, and it involves quite a bit of AI. So I think there's no denial that there's no going back when we think about what digital spaces mean for the performance of theatre and how we could possibly harness AI and not become caught up with, is it going to take our jobs? We have to move forward and faster to think of how we can use it to our advantage and perhaps create more spaces for dialogue, for creativity, for circumventing censorship, perhaps. Yep. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Howard. I want to quickly bring in some of the chats that people have put out. I think Yan Ying, who actually now working in Malasa, Yan Ying has actually responded to Howard's sharing with saying that similar crisis with US universities and Taiwan universities. And in Taiwan, the response has been to make the humanities more applied. That means we are looking at does it then means an instrumentalization of the arts of humanities? What does that mean? How does that take away, that idea of where arts can be as pure as whereby it's a kind of ecstatic exploration? And Tan Boon has asked this question to why. What is the difference between theatre space today compared to the space in those days stated in the book? But of course, Tan Boon has also agreed with Bernice that this book is also about narrative and inspection of our society in those days. Thank you, Tan Boon. I wonder if Yan Yan, if why you want to respond to this question, the difference between the theatre space today compared to the space in those days. And maybe in responding to that also would want to respond to provocation that actually how we have talked about, which is this AI space. I think this is something that sometimes has been the elephant in the room. What do we do with it after your digital space? Now you have something that's AI generated. How alive, how real, how authentic. Yeah. Bye bye.
Sure. Thanks, Heng Wen, and thanks, Tan Bun, for the question as well. Well, Heng Wen, please feel free to jump in, okay, and like correct me where I'm wrong, because I only have my present experience to base off of, and anything I understand, of the theatre space back in the 90s or early 2000s is through my understanding of speaking to more experienced practitioners and people who make works during those times as well. For I think what's similar is that all works that have to go on stage these days still have to pass by, a central licensing unit. In the past, it used to be the Public Entertainment's Licensing Unit, PELU, that was under the Singapore Police Force. And I think sometime in 2002, then it went into the hands of the Infocom Media Development Authority, IMDA. So it kind of just changed hands. But the purpose of it was pretty much still the same, to regulate any works that would make it to public performance. I think what's similar also is that, it's not always iron-fisted censorship in its approach. Sometimes it can be more subtle and underhanded. For example, decision to not fund a particular work, which in itself can be a violent act too, when so much of funding is centralized by the state and the environment was created, as such that a lot of funding comes from the state itself. And I think I draw on what Howie mentioned in the book too, where sometimes the decision not to fund the work is because it doesn't fit within the social mores of the time. But this often goes into sort of an imagined community where you're thinking of, the people at large in Singapore as this like hyper conservative, anxious group of people who, cannot bear to watch these kinds of works. Kind of thing. So I think that still holds. Like that is the impression that the Singapore government tends to have of the public. Whereas the public obviously is diverse and comprises of people from many communities, from many different points of views and perspectives. These days, I think there's also a centralizing of theatre spaces. So similar in the case in Hong Kong to government-operated venues. So recently, over the last couple of years, a lot of spaces, for example, the substation, there were hubs for more experimental works that tended to push boundaries in Singapore, were essentially taken away. And what we are seeing now is more and more centralized venues, government-operated venues as well, which also affects, in terms of the works that can be programmed and put up there. One difference that I noticed from my perspective is that the theatre companies today, because most of them were established in the 90s or the 2000s, so they also have a longer standing relationship with IMDA and these NAC and these censorship bodies compared to in the 90s when they were young and nascent. So 30 years of relationship, right? So that can often be tenuous, volatile, but also space for negotiation and dialogue and understanding too. So I know of companies that, have a meeting with IMDA, sit down, what are your problems with it? Oh, this part, let me talk you through it. So if I'm not wrong, I think more conversation is enabled these days. The result of it obviously is can greatly differ from one production to the next. But there is space, I think, for that little bit of conversation and trying to make them understand your point of view as well. In a most recent production that I worked on, I wasn't in the room, but from what I understand was that, the company had sat down with IMDA in a room and there were like 4 specific parts that they had noted down in the script that were problematic. And the company I was working with in their mind was like, really, these are the parts that you took issues with? And those were battles that they chose not to fight, because honestly, it's just like small changes. But then there were actually bigger and more important issues in the place that might not have been picked up on. So that was an interesting kind of dynamic to witness as well. And lastly, I was just thinking about this from my opinion, I think there are fewer works today that are more brazenly provocative in the theatre space. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but I think it's the reckoning that it's a shifting landscape now, right? Where we have social media and mainstream media, where we are so inundated with information and trauma and pain as well. And oftentimes, I think in the 90s or early 2000s, the provocation was necessary to stimulate and raise awareness But these days, we already have so much of this information, and the awareness is already so present on our Facebook or Instagram, or just scrolling the Straits Times or New York Times, whatever. So my big question is theatre's function still to raise awareness? Is theatre's function, has it changed or pivoted since the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when now we already do receive so much of this information through other sources? Yeah.
Can I just respond very quickly to what Bernice has mentioned? I think when we look at how much social media has dominated our life, I think it's always interesting to think about the user. So in the context of theatre, there remains a huge gap in the research on audiences, or even how artists, practitioners can involve audiences in more exciting ways. If we think about how social media has created this immense volume of like reaction videos, I find that very silly. But when you actually place the audience, this person reacting to people doing makeup before and after, coming out of expressions, and that itself is a product. It's a work that gets that trends and invites so many clicks. So I would use actually two examples. So in my book, I talk about Vagina Lock, where Li Xie, the actor, actually implicated the audience by using it's like a TV show. So sometimes when there's a cue, the person would actually the actor would actually come up with a cue card, say applause. So there was this point in Vagina Lock where the audience is witnessing sexual violence against women, yet the cue was to clap applause. So it was interesting at that moment. Now I attended one of those performances where some of the audiences clapped, but some felt uncomfortable. There was this uneasiness, whereas some were bemused. And that always raises issues of ethics, right? Another example would be Li Shiju's play, Lim Hui Bin's The Rape. So they implicated the audience. So we're talking about rape that takes place, sexual violence that takes place in a pub in Singapore and based on real life events. So they implicated the audience by, when you go to a pub, you get a stamp, right? So the audiences were all stamped before they went in, but by accepting the stamp, they bear witness to sexual violence that takes place in a pub, which is actually a performance. That they actually do nothing while this happens makes them accomplices to the act. So I think it's important that it's even exciting that if we can think about, if there are already so many reaction videos, are we able to involve audiences in the making and critique or of theatre? Now, another example would be forum theatre, where it's very obvious when the audiences get invited, and I talk quite a bit of that in my book as well. So the other thing I would also like to respond to, when we think about audiences, the assumptions we make of them. In my article on Guo Baokun, when he was talking about audiences, it was interesting when we go back to the 80s and 90s, Baokun was thinking about audiences as being intellectual, critical, and also being independent, subjects who can critique, question. And that is the line which companies like The Necessary Stage and Grammar Box have taken for a long time. But are we able to push that further? So, of course, we have an interesting case, for example, in earlier renditions of Both Sides Now, where audiences become actors as well. Like they were involved in Both Sides Now, or they might have been involved in community projects, and they then decide to contribute the stories, and they become the artists. So there's a lot of research to be done in these areas, but are there other ways we can think about the audience's involvement? We can implicate them, we can involve them, we can collaborate with them. Yeah, thank you.
I wonder, Bernice would have any thoughts about this idea of an audience being involved in the Hong Kong situation.
Thank you so much. I think because of the it becomes a very popular form of theaters for involving like audience participation. And I think Heng must be kind of familiar with the Hong Kong participatory theater in Hong Kong. I think even before the COVID, the immersive theater, participatory theaters are very popular in Hong Kong, even though for now, no matter it was presented on stage or in a theater space or in a community context. And I think it's more like applied theater at some point for our practitioners to be able to present their work through a lot of like topics or some issues that they would like to discuss with the audience. And I think this kind of theater in Hong Kong now, I won't say it's less, it's a bit difficult to present on stage. It is because it's issue-based. So I think it's in particular difficult for the practitioners to grasp what kind of issue that we can discuss or what kind of issue that we cannot discuss. So even though for selecting issues that may create a lot of like anxiety for the practitioners, and also for Hong Kong before the COVID, and now even though for now documentary theater is a kind of like format that a lot of practitioners would like to get involved or use documentary theater as a way of telling their story. But I think also because of what just I mentioned about, it is still makes a lot of like hesitation for our practitioners to express themselves using this kind of theater. And another point that I would like to mention is because of the COVID, gather in a public space, it makes a lot of like issues for the government, because during the COVID there is a policy that you cannot gather more than I think 4 or 10 people because that's during the COVID time. But even though for now I think it's not because of the COVID, it's because of something else that you may not be able to have a license to gather people in a community or a public space. And usually what this kind of like theaters is actually happened in a public space, so to be able to be visible, like what Drama Box had done in Singapore. So I think these 2 points, it maybe make our participatory theater more difficult to survive at some point. And another response that I would like to make is about the AI, because actually last year I did present an AI workshop with a group of theater critics to use AI to write critics, and actually it worked quite well at some point. And we give them some words for the AI to write about a Hamlet, a local production, festivals, and they create a relatively like making sense a piece of critics. So the anxiety, I think, for critics with an AI is you really have to have your own like insight, and you really have to have some unique points or some unique comments about that particular show, or else AI will take over your place, because that definitely is something that could happen. And I'm not saying that AI is something that is evil, but if we can make use of it, maybe it can create a new perspectives for us to think about what theater criticism will be about. And last but not least, I would like to also mention about a show on Playread. It's a play reading presented by a local theater organization, and it's Singapore playwrights writing, and I just find out the name. It's Alfian Sate. Alfian Sate.
Alfian Sa'at, The Death of Theatre, was presented in Hong Kong recently.
Yes, the
Yes,
play is so inspiring. It's talking about censorship in Singapore, but using a very like witty and also interesting way for us to think what censorship is about in a Singaporean theater making's context. And I think it's also for us very good like example to be think of, and also to reflect what situation that we are now encountering. And so I really would like to know and to learn more from the theater practitioners in Singapore, really.
I just want to respond to a bit also to the idea of the participatory theatre. I had the privilege of actually running a participatory theatre workshop in Hong Kong. I think that was before COVID, right? When I was there and I did the lesson. And what I thought was really interesting, because that was, I think, 2018 or 2019. And actually, a lot of people have really gone through that social movement in the earlier part of that social movement. And while running the workshop, I realized that it is not just about the issue that one needs to handle and what one can say, but there's also the trauma whereby the people are living through, and through that kind of participatory performance, they'll be revisiting some of this trauma and how those can be managed. What is the care and what is the safety, and yet at the same time, how much imagination does such participatory performance provide one to look into possible future. And I think the idea of what theatre can do, which just now, Yan Ying has asked about the role of theatre. Now that last time theatre would be providing insights or to open or ask questions, when so many questions have been asked of on internet, some rhetorical, some nonsensical, but some very real. And with so much things happening, I'm not sure, or I'm still learning, even as myself, that, how does one discern? How does one listen? How does one become critical? And then how do one choose, pick, and understand? And if we do not pass through that, then what happens is that, do we then regurgitate what everybody is saying? And then what happens is that we may be adding to more noise in the entire, through our work. Yeah. So I think those are really important. And that means the space then becomes more and more noisy, congested, and then in a way, as a public space, if theater become a public space, what kind of public space does it become? And if we go back to Habermas to talk about, where public space is a communitarian kind of a space where by communitarian, it's really also talking about the act of it being in action. What kind of action can happen in this kind of space? Yeah. Any other things from because I'm mindful of time. We can still say a lot of things. Anything from our friends here?
Just writing off
Analyst?
that on what you mentioned about function of theatre today as well. Just before COVID hit, I was still in New York, so I began to also notice, a new wave of works coming up where, because we were so inundated with pain and trauma and difficult things on social media and news media. So there was a segment of the theatre community that started to do theatre works more for healing and, in a way, therapy. So it was quite interesting to witness. I think I haven't even fully processed it yet, because I've sat in some of those spaces and it felt different and new, because theater, from what I understand, is so much about conflict and challenging the status quo and confrontation in that way. So to enter a space that it's more gentle, more focused on healing and creating space for care, I didn't know quite what to feel about that. In fact, I was a bit uncomfortable, because I think that was just new lah. And I think those artists felt strongly that because there is already so much pain and trauma in the world, why should I do a work to add on to that? So they wanted to completely subvert that by creating that space of healing as well. So like I said, something I'm still processing, because I do see value in that, but I was also going to the theater hoping to be challenged but then maybe I should also be meeting that work for what it is and where it is. But it was interesting because personally, when I experienced those works, I wanted to talk about the deep and complex issues and all that. So I didn't feel quite so satisfied or healed actually coming out of that space. But then also recognizing that, those works might have been created for specific communities as well. And it's not about me. And perhaps I was just a witness to that experience of communal healing, say, for example, of the Black community and Black artists, and maybe I was just a guest in that space. So to also respect that. So I think in interesting ways that, theater is seen and being created these days.
Thanks, YY. Yes, Bernice, you want to say something?
And I would like to add a point that even though we are now in Hong Kong encountering a very difficult time, but I think it's still in a transitional period because we are not familiar with a lot of things that we are now encountering. And I think it takes time for a practitioner to think or to find a way to work with the situation right now. And I think it's hard to say it's 5 years or 10 years time, but I think this transitional period may not be a short one. And also, I think our audience are now, they may have a lot of things to say. I think stories are still there. And what I'm thinking is, I think we still need to keep this space, no matter it's a physical space of theater or some digital or intangible space, for them to express themselves. Different stories, I think they would like to be listened, and also they would like to express in many ways. And also our audience, I think they're now really like intelligence kind of audience, because they can really read what's the metaphor on stage. So don't think our audience, they need something really like explicit. You can do something like metaphor or something. Our audience, I think, could read what they would like to be to see. And also I think for the technology in Hong Kong, we are going to have a new venue operated by the government. It's a new government operated venue, but it's focused on arts and technology. So I think maybe in 10 years time, technology and also digital device or to be used on theater is something that we also really looking forward to. And so that's what I would like to make a remarks on what just what I mentioned about.
Howie?
Yeah. So yeah. I think when we talk about space, while digital spaces are increasingly important and they are not going to go away, and it's great to see how we are reimagining digital spaces for theater practice and creation. I would like to ask, what is it about the physicality of, and the materiality of actual, theaters or public spaces that makes the experience irreplaceable? Is there, that's what Guo Baokun mentions about the live presence of people coming together, sharing that moment, still important? If it is, why? That's one of the things I thought of. And when we think about communities, something I want to elaborate just a little bit on when I talk about theater and AI. As much as AI was used in that Queer East performance, that multidisciplinary art production, it was also interesting, something I did not mention earlier just now, towards the end, they actually invited a voguing group based in London. So this was a group of people of color coming together, or diverse backgrounds, who just vogue for fun. And so there is this dialogue going on between the shamanism, the tiaotang in a temple in Yishun, and then that is already so theatrical, right? And then there is, towards the end, they invite a community into that space that makes the art more accessible. And you could tell that people were there, quite a number of audiences were there to support this voguing group as well. But during the process, they get to experience some of, other art forms they have never been exposed to, perhaps. Right. So the question then becomes, is there a theatricality of other realms and other lives, or in everyday life that allows us to reimagine theater? We often think about theater as, yeah, it's important for theater to be provocative. It is important for theater to be healing as well. But is there something about paring it down to the basics of theater? Are there places where you haven't looked into yet? In religion, in spirituality, in the simple pleasures of life, for example. And why might that be important? Are these ways we can circumvent the harshness of censorship, or are there metaphors to be, and hidden or embedded in the everyday life that can help us battle the cruelty of authoritarianism, for example? Yeah.
Um, I think I'm not trying to open up another new topic, but I would like to mention that
Yeah.
I always think we always think new generation of audience is very important, and work with AI and work with other new device. But I think the aging issue in the whole global context is something that we really need to think of. And in Hong Kong as well, I think recently we have a lot of focus theater workshops or theater courses featuring like senior citizens. And I think it's good for us to also pay attention as well. And it's also a potential market for Hong Kong theater as well. If you would like to explore your new audience, maybe the senior citizens is really something that we really need to take care of.
Thank you very much. I want to sort of round up this one because it's going to be six. I just want to say that I've been thinking, I mean, as you are talking about, I am just reminded of Milan Kundera in the book of Forgetting and Laughter and Forgetting had this very interesting line. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory or against forgetting. And I think in an act of making theater, there's always an act of remembering. And in the act of remembering, it actually invites people to linger, to stay there, to train our eyes, our observations, our listening towards that experience. And I think that somehow a lot of time, almost like what I say, in art making, the artist literally steal time away from people. That means I steal your time so that you spend time with me without knowing that you spend 1 hour, just that our audience has spent the last 1.5 hours with us, to just be with each other and to think or to imagine or to heal or to be with each other. And I think in a way that's the power of theater, whether online, not online, that presence to be with each other is really something that a lot of time theater celebrates. With that, I would like to thank Howie, I would thank YY, I would thank Bernice for having this wonderful conversation, and of course, people who are listening to us. Last but not least, I want to thank Howie again for the book, for taking part in actually doing the translation together with us. Please try to get a copy of the ebook. You can also get a copy of the printed book by having a donation for Drama Box. So you can go onto our website there. We have this, you can see this QR code, so you can use it. Thank you very much, everyone. I think when Drama Box organize it, we really want to do this through listening and learning from the rest of friends here. I think today I've been thinking, like, for example, one thing is how have Singapore start archiving all our pandemic digital performances? What are we doing? Have we started doing it? I think it's an important question. I don't know whether we've done it or not. Maybe YY knows. She will tell me. But I think there are many things that through this kind of panel discussion we learn. And thank you for everyone. And we hope to see you all again. Bernice, I hope you see you in Hong Kong or you come to Singapore, okay? And I'll see YY and Howie very soon again.
Just a very
Thank you
quick
so
comment.
much,
I
everyone.
think Yan Ying has raised very good questions, but I think we have to, due to time, we have to take them up in a privately or in another platform, perhaps. Yeah. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.